Alright, so this is going to be my first video on this channel, and it's going to be part one of a series debunking some things said in a video by Kyle Orthodox right here. His guest, David, claims a number of things that are false about Hinduism, and I'm going to debunk what he says about an important concept in many Hindu philosophies, Māyā. He claims that Māyā means illusion, and that in Hinduism the entire world is just an illusion. Afterwards, David attempts to show how we can argue against Hinduism given this description of Māyā and the world. But in the context of what Kyle and David are discussing, however, this description is false, and I will demonstrate how Māyā can mean different things for different kinds of Hinduism. I will then argue that even if we accept the false description, David's argument fails. I will then offer an alternative argument, which is not originally from me, but from a Hindu school of thought called Nyāya, which thereby further demonstrates the falsehood of David's description of Hinduism. Let's begin. So David has this to say about Māyā. Here's the timestamp if you want to take a look. But in summary, David says that Māyā means that the world is a false representation because it is an illusion. Illusion means false perception. It is wrong. The world is a false reality. But this is not what Māyā means. Māyā does not mean illusion in this context. Do not let other sources like Wikipedia fool you. Let me give some perspective so you know where I am coming from here. I have taken university courses and also read numerous scholarly articles on Hindu philosophies in my own time. I have read many of their sutras, the Upanishads, and so on. I am learning Sanskrit, the original language that Hindu texts were written in. I have written many papers on Hindu philosophy, including on Māyā as a concept in Hindu schools of thought like Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism. In the context of what Kyle and David are discussing, nowhere should Māyā be called an illusion. Professors would hammer it into our heads that illusion can be an incredibly misleading translation in spite of its popular use. In fact, how to understand Māyā has been debated among Hindus themselves. Part of the reason for this is because Hinduism is not even a single religion, really. Hindu is a term the British used to label a vast swath of basically distinct religious groups that nonetheless agreed that four texts called the Vedas were sacred sources of knowledge. Indeed, sometimes even within particular Hindu traditions, how to define Māyā has been a serious source of debate and has changed over time. To quote the scholar Prabhudat Shāstrī, if Māyā had an unalterable and fixed meaning throughout the history of Indian thought, our task as scholars would have been lighter. But as it is, the word is very fluid, and has at different times assumed various shapes of different meanings. Let's finally start generating some examples here. In the Rig Veda, the oldest of the four Vedas, the definition of Māyā is vast and alternating. For example, Professor Gaudrion says that Māyā can mean extraordinary power or vision. As for illusion, across all four Vedas, it has come to be recognized in Western scholarship that this is an overly generalized, if not downright false translation, although it has more development in the Atharva Veda. So, in 1911, Shāstrī wrote that many scholars, like Munir Williams, say that for Māyā, the meanings of art, wisdom, extraordinary or supernatural power are only found in the earlier language of the Rig Veda. But when he adds that in it Māyā also means illusion, unreality, deception, fraud, trick, sorcery, witchcraft, magic, he is not accurate and is using these words loosely. Some shade of these is of course in the Rig Veda, and their further development is noticed in the Atharva Veda, but to say that all these are found in the Rig Veda is not correct, but a hasty and erroneous generalization. And then the scholar Hendrik Vroom explains, the term Māyā has been translated as illusion, but then it does not mean that the world is not real and is a figment of imagination. Māyā means that the world is not as it seems. It is misleading as far as its true nature is concerned. So true, many scholars even today continue to translate Māyā as illusion sometimes. But they understand that this translation doesn't mean exactly what we as laymen would understand. Let's move on from the Vedas. In many philosophies of Hinduism, particularly non-dual schools, Māyā is better understood as some kind of absence in our perception. The world and its objects, as I see it, are not the fullness of what they are. This seems trivial at first glance. No one sees objects in infrared vision, for example, but it can get much, much deeper than this. In non-dual Hindu schools, Māyā is why I see things as distinct from one another, rather than two sides of the same coin. That coin being what all things are ultimately manifestations of, and not distinct from. For example, in a non-dual school called Advaita Vedanta, all of reality is underlyingly Brahman, aka pure consciousness, which is what the self truly is. Brahman is supposed to be metaphysically simple, which means that it is indivisible. But if that is the case, then how do we perceive objects as distinct from one another? The answer, if you haven't already guessed by now, is Māyā. For example, red and blue are both manifestations of Brahman. However, Māyā as a phenomenon causes us to never perceive red and blue as coexisting together, and thus we refer them as really distinct colors. Māyā is also why I'd never realized that red and blue are fundamentally Brahman. Dr. Prabhudat Shāstrī wrote a book called The Doctrine of Māyā in the Philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, where he says, the world, says the Māyā theory in its correct interpretation, is an appearance, not a mere illusion, since the latter as such is impossible. As limited by space, time, and causality, the world is an appearance, but in its own nature it is the self. As Shāstrī said, appearance is not the same thing as illusion. Illusion entails that the perception is just flat out wrong. But appearance can mean misleading or incomplete, both of which do not deny truth outright. And these latter two meanings are more accurate to Māyā in Advaita Vedanta. Māyā is appearance as in an incomplete perception of reality, which causes us to have misleading or false assumptions of what things fundamentally are. This ignorance, or avidya, includes believing objects and subjects are really distinct from one another. Māyā is also why we feel as if walls are impenetrable, or why we see things move through space, even though everything has always been where we see it going. Māyā is thus a phenomenon where we fail to perceive that everything is the indivisible Brahman, though clearly Advaita Vedanta does not deny that these things exist in at least some sense. Another school of Hinduism, called Kashmir Shaivism, is also non-dual, but uses Māyā slightly differently. In Kashmir Shaivism, every single object, action, and any other aspect of the world are manifestations of the god Śiva. This includes other gods as well. This entails that you, dear listener, are also Śiva. Yet despite all this, Śiva never stops being fully himself either. How does this manifestation work? After all, I never noticed that I am anything more than a mere human. Kashmir Shaivists describe it as Śiva playing as each of these things. This is similar to cosplaying, where we play a character that manifests certain aspects of ourselves, and the character usually never knows that it is in a play. But at the same time, we never stop being our true selves. Alright, but how does Śiva assume these characters? The cosplay analogy is nice, but let's add some metaphysical meat to these bones. And the answer ends up being Māyā! Here, Māyā is defined as one of Shiva's powers, which he uses to conceal parts of himself so as to play each and every single one of us. With the power of Māyā, Śiva has it that I do not cognize that everything, including myself, is underlyingly Śiva himself. This power also creates the appearance that some objects are really distinct from one another as well. This phenomenon is described as the non-cognition of non-duality. By non-cognition, we mean that either something is not focused on, or that one is unaware of something. By non-duality, we mean that two things are, in truth, simply variants of each other. Thus, non-cognition of non-duality is where one, by lower focus/awareness, perceives two sides of the same coin as wholly distinct. You might notice that Advaita Vedanta can also be said to have non-cognition of non-duality, albeit in a slightly different way. So, for example, a Kashmir Shaivist might say that I have a clay pot when I use it for flowers, but when I flip it upside down because I've decided I want something to sit on, from this I now call this pot a chair. For lesser beings, Māyā can conceal that the pot and the chair are just manifestations of the same clay, but we know otherwise. So too is it with Śiva in relation to the subjects and objects that he plays as. Thus, why the Kashmir Shaivist Somanānda, regarding the many shapes we find gold, says, "Can one maintain that the nature of gold may possibly exist in the ball on the goldsmith's mat, but not in the earring. The ball of gold and the earring made of gold are both just different shapes, configurations, or manifestations of gold itself. But then we realize from this that gold, along with silver and copper and titanium, are just manifestations of metal. And metal is just one of the manifestations of matter of being, and so on. And so the Kashmir Shaivists will eventually say that once you get to the bottom of it, everything is underlyingly a manifestation of Śiva. Some might say that the Kashmir Shaivist rendition of Māyā destroys the line between illusion and real perception. After all, it follows that my distinguishing between illusions and real perceptions is also due to this non-cognition. Additionally, if it is Śiva engaging in play, then it would seem that Śiva is willing which things I associate as real and illusory. Thus, there is no distinction between the two. There is truth to this, but also notice that if there is no distinction, then it does not follow that all perceptions are actually illusions in the traditional sense. It could be the opposite, that all illusions actually belong to the category of real perceptions. It could also be that both traditional concepts for real and false perceptions are misguided. Kashmir Shaivism leans more towards this last conception. How so? Well, this does not imply that the distinction between illusions and quote real unquote perceptions are totally unimportant. Śiva has carved out his method of play by creating the conventional categories of illusions and perceptions that we have. Through Māyā, what we might call, quote, real, unquote, perceptions are indexed as beyond the viewer. As the Kashmir Shaivist Utpaladeva says, insofar as they are manifested as external owing to the power of Māyā, they exist externally. Meanwhile, illusions are subject-indexed experiences, meaning that they are perceptions understood as being solely within the mind of a particular viewer. They are not externalized nearly as much, for they are understood as manifestations in the mind, but Māyā is still somehow at play, since the imagined objects are still thought of as distinct from the self. Thus, during a dream, the experiencer will feel as if the events are apart from their mind, but those watching them will say they are just dreaming, and understand the events to be indexed within the sleeping subject. The subject will then think the same upon awakening. Additionally, Māyā causes us to view illusions, dreams, and imagination as having a hard separation from true reality, even though they exist just as much as external objects insofar as they are all ultimately Śiva. So yes, at a fundamental level, the distinction between subject, mental object, and external object is unreal. Mental objects do not exist as merely separate from reality, and external objects are not truly external to the subject, since all types of objects and subjects are Śiva, who is also ultimate reality and truth. But this still entails that calling the world an illusion is false. It is instead an incomplete summation of reality. Furthermore, that the line between illusion and perception is destroyed is only half true because at a practical level, Śiva has it that we live our lives with a differentiation between mere mental experiences, like hallucinations, and objects understood as apart from the self. That being said, realizing the unreality of these distinctions is still paramount to reaching liberation from this life for the Kashmir Shaivists. Meanwhile, there are many schools of Hinduism that do not believe that reality is non-dual. Such schools do not call the world an illusion either. For instance, Nyāya is a Hindu school and is your classic, common-sense realist position. The world is real. Our senses are a reliable means of engaging with reality. There are really distinct objects. They have real properties, and the way we categorize them can reflect that. And there is a difference between real perceptions of the world and illusions. Vaiśeṣika, a historically distinct Hindu school, harbors the same thoughts. In fact, Nyāya and Vaiśeṣika would eventually merge into one school, Nyāya-Vaiśeṣika, due to how similar and complementary their views were. Nyāya typically deploys the word mithya and not Māyā to mean illusion. Vaiśeṣika and Nyāya believe that Māyā is a major aspect of the temporary world, but this world is neither an illusion nor an appearance like what Advaita Vedanta or Kashmir Shaivism say. And then there is Dvaita Vedanta, as opposed to Advaita Vedanta. Dvaita Vedanta, or dual Vedanta, believes that there is a real distinction between objects of the world and Brahman. Historically, they believe that Brahman is the god Vishnu, and that each person reflects him in some way, not that we are him. They believe that Advaita Vedanta's cosmology on avidya and Māyā is self-defeating. Instead, Māyā causes ignorance of our intrinsic potential to be reflections of Vishnu. Like Nyāya-Vaiśeṣika, Advaita Vedanta believes in a real distinction between individual living beings, God, matter, and so on. Now, there are a lot of details from these 5 schools that I have left out, so I apologize if this is all a bit confusing. Maybe one day I'll go into greater depth about them, along with other Indian schools of thought. But do any of these conceptions of Māyā describe the world as an illusion? No, they clearly don't. The nature of actual illusions, especially in schools like Kashmir Shaivism, is a whole other ballpark. Even for Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, the closest we get to our understanding of the world being illusory is that we have made an incorrect inference of what the things of the world are due to an incomplete picture of them. That's not the same thing as an illusion, meaning that the world is just flat out wrong. And this is just from 2 understandings of Māyā. As I have shown, there are many different interpretations, and even when Māyā can be called illusion, it does not imply how David understands it. Alright, I know I said in the beginning that there would be a second part to this video where I would explain why David's argument against the world as an illusion doesn't really work, and how Hindus are able to actually respond to it in a better way. But it's pretty late now. I got other things I need to do, and looking at the timestamp of this video, looks like it's going to be almost 20 minutes potentially, and it's going to exceed way too long than I would hope for. So I am going to stop it here, and we will do that in part 2. Next video will be all about that, okay? If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I know the quality of my audio is garbage right now, but hey, maybe in the future, if things end up going well for this channel, I will be able to upgrade things over time. Anyway, tune in for the next one. See you around.